Story 1. The Man in the Parking Garage. I used to work as a night security guard for a mid-sized corporate office downtown. Most people assume those jobs are boring. You sit at a desk, drink coffee, check cameras, and do the occasional walkthrough. And for a while, that's exactly what it was. The building was a plain glass box, 15 stories high, with underground parking and the kind of sterile, fluorescent-lit hallways that looked the same on every floor. I had taken the job to make some money while finishing school, never thinking it would stick with me in a way I wish it hadn't. My shift started at 10 in the evening and ran until 6 in the morning. The first half of the night was usually calm. I'd see a few late-working accountants leave, maybe a janitor or two, and by midnight the place was mostly dead. That was when I had to do the first patrol, walking through each floor, checking doors, restrooms, stairwells, and finally the parking garage. The garage was always the worst part. Concrete walls that seemed to suck in every sound, long stretches of dim light broken by shadows, and the faint smell of oil and dust that never really left the air. Even when it was empty, I felt watched down there, like the walls themselves were holding something back. The first time I noticed something strange, it was subtle. I was doing my usual sweep on level B2, the lowest level of the garage, when I saw a car I didn't recognize. A black sedan, parked in a space near the far wall. Nothing unusual about that. Employees sometimes left their cars overnight. But when I shined my flashlight through the windshield, I thought I saw someone sitting in the driver's seat. I walked closer, my boots echoing against the floor, and the beam of light settled across the interior. The seat was empty. Maybe it was a trick of the shadows, I told myself. Still, I noted the plate number and moved on. The next night, the same car was there. Same spot, same shadows across the windshield. I checked again, empty. By the third night, I had started to dread going down there. The garage was huge, and every sound carried strangely. A single drop of water hitting concrete would echo like footsteps. It was the fourth night when things escalated. I stepped off the elevator into B2 and immediately felt the air shift. It was colder than usual, and not the kind of cold that comes from recycled air. It felt damp, heavy. The black sedan was still in its spot. But this time, the headlights flickered once. I froze. Cars don't just flash unless someone's inside or a key fob is used. I scanned the garage, but it was empty. At least, it looked empty. I pulled out my radio, but the static was louder than usual, crackling in my ear. "Control to base," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. I walked toward the car, heart hammering, every step echoing back like someone else was walking with me. When I got close enough to touch the hood, I stopped. The surface was warm. Someone had been driving it. But the building was locked, and I was the only one inside. I turned to leave, deciding I'd report it and let the morning staff deal with it. That's when I heard it. A low, dragging sound from the far corner of the garage, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. "Hello," I called out, though I already regretted it. My voice bounced back at me, warped by the concrete. The dragging stopped. I swept my flashlight in that direction, the beam cutting through the dark. For just a second, I saw a movement, a leg, pale and thin, slipping behind a column. I felt my stomach drop. Whoever it was didn't want me to see them. I backed toward the elevator, never taking the light off the column. The silence was crushing, broken only by the hum of the bulbs overhead. When I finally reached the elevator button and pressed it, the sound of machinery starting up was a relief. But just before the doors opened, I heard footsteps. Fast, uneven, running toward me from behind. I spun around, flashlight shaking, catching only the blur of something ducking out of sight behind the parked cars. The elevator doors opened, and I jumped inside, mashing the close button. The last thing I saw before they sealed shut was the reflection of the garage in the polished steel, and in the far distance, a figure standing perfectly still between two columns, watching. I didn't report it. Not yet. Who was I supposed to tell? My supervisor already thought I was jumpy. And what was I going to say? That a phantom car and some shadow figure were haunting the garage. I told myself it had to be a squatter, or maybe some employee playing a prank. But deep down, I already knew better. That night, I couldn't shake the image of that figure. The way it hadn't moved when I spotted it, the way it seemed almost too tall for the space it stood in. I barely slept. And when I came back the next night, the black sedan was gone. For a while, things went back to normal. But the sense of being watched never left me, especially when I descended into B2. And it wasn't long before the figure returned. I told myself I was imagining things. That's what you do when your mind refuses to accept what your eyes saw. I clung to the idea that stress, exhaustion, and caffeine had played tricks on me. But denial doesn't last forever. 2 nights later, the sense of dread returned the moment I stepped into the garage. The elevator doors slid open with their usual groan, but the silence beyond them was wrong. Usually, there was at least some hum from pipes, a soft drip of condensation. That night, nothing. Just air so still it felt like the place had been holding its breath, waiting for me. I started my walk, flashlight trembling in my hand despite my best efforts to stay calm. Row after row of parked cars, their windshields catching little slivers of the overhead light. Every reflection seemed to shift as I passed, as though faces pressed against the glass when I wasn't looking. I shook the thought away. At the far end, where the concrete opened into a ramp leading to the outside street, I froze. The black sedan was back. Same space, same angle. Its presence was like a splinter under the skin, too small to seem threatening, too persistent to ignore. I approached slowly. My boots clicked against the concrete, each sound too loud in the emptiness. The car sat in silence. But this time, as I raised the flashlight, I saw them. Fingerprints. Dozens of them, smeared across the inside of the windshield. They weren't like the marks left by someone wiping glass. They were pressed against it from the inside, scattered, overlapping, like desperate hands had clawed for escape. I staggered back, all rising in my throat. I couldn't make sense of it. No employee would leave something like that. It was wrong, deeply wrong. Then the air shifted. A faint vibration hummed through the ground, subtle enough that at first I thought it was an engine. But no, it was rhythmic, like footsteps. I turned the flashlight, sweeping the beams across the concrete pillars. And there it was again, a figure, tall, impossibly thin, standing halfway obscured in the shadows. This time it didn't hide. It leaned out from the pillar, just enough for the light to catch its face. Except it wasn't a face. Not really. Where I should have been, there were hollow indentations. Its jaw hung too wide, as if unhinged. And its skin, if you could call it that, looked stretched, translucent, as though it had been pulled tight over something too large beneath. I stumbled backward, my radio falling from my belt and skittering across the floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot, and the figure moved. Not toward me, not away, just closer in a way I can't explain, as though the space between us folded and it simply arrived nearer. I bolted. My legs carried me faster than I thought possible, past the car, past the endless rows of shadows, toward the elevator. Every step thundered in my ears. I didn't dare look back. When I reached the doors, I slammed the button repeatedly. Nothing. The little screen above the frame glitched, numbers flickering rapidly. 10, 8, 12, 4. None of it made sense. The elevator wasn't coming. The footsteps started again. Behind me, uneven, scraping against the concrete. Closer, closer. I didn't think. I ran for the stairwell. The metal door crashed open under my weight, and I flew up the steps, taking them two at a time. My breath tore through my lungs, vision narrowing. The sound followed me. Not footsteps now, but something dragging. Something heavy scraping against the floor below, growing louder as if it was ascending without effort. By the time I burst onto the ground floor, sweat soaked through my uniform. I slammed the stairwell door shut and locked it, though the thin latch felt laughably useless. The lobby was empty, silent except for my ragged breathing. I collapsed into the security booth, fumbling with the monitors. My hands shook as I flipped through the garage feeds. For a moment, static filled every screen. Then, slowly, the image returned. The sedan sat motionless. The pillars cast their long shadows. The garage looked empty. But then, on camera 7, in the corner near the stairwell, it appeared. The figure, standing perfectly still, head tilted upward, as though staring directly at the camera lens. My supervisor came in around 6 a.m. I didn't tell him the truth. Instead, I reported suspicious activity in the garage, claimed I thought someone was trying to break into cars. He nodded, said he'd check with the building manager, and that was that. The next shift, I was tempted to call in sick. But I needed the money, and pride has a way of convincing you to ignore your own fear. Still, when I arrived, I couldn't force myself to go down to be too alone. I stayed in the booth longer than usual, watching the monitors. That's when I noticed something that nearly made me leave the job that night. The fingerprints on the sedan's windshield? They weren't the same. They had shifted. Where before they'd been scattered and overlapping, now they were arranged neatly. For prints together, spaced evenly apart, right where a hand would press if it were waiting. I zoomed the camera in, stomach clenching. The prints weren't just hands. They were larger, longer, almost as if whatever made them had too many fingers. And as I stared, the screen flickered once, just once, and for a fraction of a second, a face appeared pressed against the glass from inside the car. Wide jaw, hollow eyes, watching me. I slammed the monitor off. That night, I didn't finish my patrol. I stayed in the booth until morning, refusing to step foot in the garage. But deep down, I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. Eventually, I'd have to go back down there. And when I did, I had this sinking feeling it would be waiting for me. I lasted 2 more shifts before something happened that forced me to confront it. For those 2 nights, I convinced myself the best way to survive was to stay put in the booth. I made my patrols shorter, skipping B2 altogether. I told myself the cameras were enough, that I could secure the garage without ever stepping inside it. But paranoia doesn't fade when you avoid something. It grows, festers, mutates. Every monitor flicker made my skin crawl. Every shadow seemed to stretch when I wasn't looking. On the 3rd night, just after 2 a.m., the phone rang. We rarely got calls at that hour. I nearly jumped out of my chair when it buzzed. Security, I answered, voice tight. Static crackled on the other end, then a slow, rasping breath. Long inhale, long exhale. My skin went cold. Who is this? The line clicked. Silence. I hung up quickly, forcing myself to laugh it off. Probably some drunk prank caller. But when I glanced at the monitors, my stomach twisted. On camera 7, the one that covered the far corner of B2, I saw the black sedan's headlights flash once. Not a flicker, a flash, like someone had just pressed the fob. And then the phone rang again. This time I didn't answer, but the caller ID froze me where I sat. It didn't show a number. It showed a location. B2 garage booth. I dropped the receiver like it burned me. My eyes darted to the monitors, but all I saw was static. Every camera in the garage went black at once. I had 2 choices: sit there and wait for something I couldn't see, or confront it head-on. Against every instinct, I chose the second. I grabbed my flashlight, my keys, and a length of metal pipe I kept behind the booth for emergencies. My legs carried me, unwilling, toward the stairwell. The heavy metal door groaned as I pulled it open, and the air that rushed out hit me like a wall, damp, sour, and cold. Step by step, I descended. Each echo of my boots bounced back, warped, like someone else was following a beat behind me. I kept my flashlight trained downward, scanning every corner, every step, refusing to let the shadows win. When I finally reached B2, the stairwell door resisted when I pushed it, like something pressed back from the other side. I shoved harder, metal screeching against concrete, until it gave way. The garage was darker than I'd ever seen it. Half the lights were out, leaving long stretches of shadow between cars. The black sedan waited, same spot, headlights faintly glowing as if daring me closer. I stepped in, every nerve in my body on fire. If someone's down here, you need to leave. Right now. My voice echoed, hollow and thin. Silence. Then, from behind the car, that dragging sound. Slow, deliberate, metal against concrete. I circled wide, trying not to get too close to the sedan. My flashlight cut through the dark, catching glimpses of movement, shadows sliding just out of reach. My grip on the pipe tightened until my knuckles ached. When I finally reached the far side, I stopped dead. The fingerprints on the windshield weren't just prints anymore. They had deepened, smeared into grooves that looked more like claw marks. And inside the car, God help me, something was moving. A shape writhed in the back seat, distorted through the glass. Pale limbs pressing against the windows, too many joints bending the wrong way. A face, or what resembled one, slammed against the glass, mouth stretched impossibly wide. The sedan rocked slightly as though whatever was inside was straining to get out. I staggered back, heart pounding, while burning my throat. That's when the dragging sound stopped. I turned. The figure stood in the open space between two pillars, closer than it had ever been. Its head cocked sideways, body leaning forward unnaturally, as though its bones weren't built for standing. Hollow indentations where its eyes should have been seemed locked on. Story 2. The Copy Room Stalker. Every office has a space people avoid. At mine, it was the copy room. On paper, there was nothing wrong with it. Just a long, narrow room stuffed with 3 giant machines that sounded like jet engines when they warmed up. The fluorescent lights overhead always buzzed, sometimes flickering in a way that made the whole place feel unstable, like it was underwater. The walls were too close, the ceiling too low. When the machines were running, the air got hot, heavy, and stale. Most people hated going in there alone, but they couldn't explain why. They'd send interns instead, or wait until someone else had a reason to go. I didn't like it either, but I didn't have the luxury of avoidance. As a junior analyst barely holding onto my position, my life was endless printouts, stapling, and midnight copying sessions. That was when I first noticed the feeling. It wasn't just the hum of the machines, though that was bad enough. It was the sense that someone was standing just out of view. If I turned my head too quickly, I'd catch what I thought was a figure reflected in the glass of the copier lid. Always faint, always gone by the time I focused. At first, I chalked it up to exhaustion. Long hours, bad coffee, recycled air. The kind of workplace fatigue that makes shadows seem alive. But then the small things began. One night, I came in to copy a set of reports. I dropped the stack on the tray, turned my back for 1 second to grab a stapler, and when I turned back, the top page was missing. I thought I had imagined it. Maybe I dropped it on the way in. But when I retraced my steps, nothing. The page was just gone. Another night, I heard whispering, faint, like static, beneath the whir of the machines. My headphones were in, but I paused the music. And there it was. Words too low to understand, like someone murmuring right into my ear. When I spun around, the room was empty. That's when I started asking around. People laughed nervously when I brought it up, but no one denied it. Maria from HR told me she once saw a hand press flat against the glass from inside the copier, as if someone was trapped in it. Thomas from accounting swore he heard breathing behind him when he was in there late one night, steady and wet. Even our manager, who never entertained nonsense, admitted that for the past year, the copy room had been off. No one used the word haunted, but everyone avoided it. Still, work was work. I didn't have the clout to make excuses. So one Tuesday, I found myself in the copy room at 11:45 p.m., alone, loading 500 sheets of quarterly data into the biggest machine. The office was dead quiet outside. The hum of the copier filled the air, steady, mechanical, almost hypnotic. Then the power flickered. It only lasted a second, but it was enough. Every fluorescent bulb overhead buzzed louder, dimmed, then snapped back with a glare that hurt my eyes. The copier froze mid-cycle, display glitching with unreadable symbols. The air felt heavier, pressing down like humidity before a storm. That's when I noticed the reflection. On the glossy surface of the printer lid, I saw my own outline, and behind me, the faint shape of someone taller, shoulders hunched, standing far too close. I spun around so fast I nearly tripped over myself. Nothing, just the hum of the broken machine, still frozen in mid-process. I told myself it was a trick of the light. I told myself I was tired, but the reflection had been too clear, too sharp. I went to shut the machine off, but before I touched the button, the tray started sliding open on its own. Paper spilled onto the floor, one sheet at a time, each landing with a faint slap that echoed too loud in the narrow space. I crouched to grab them, and my hand froze on the first page. It wasn't a report. It was a photograph, black and white, grainy. The picture showed me, standing in the copy room, bent over the machine exactly as I was now. Same shirt, same tie. Only in the picture, something stood behind me. A tall, shadowed figure, its hands resting on my shoulders. I dropped it like it burned me. The stack kept sliding out, more photos, one after another, until the floor was scattered with them. Each showed me in the copy room at different times. Yesterday, last week, even months back, judging by my clothes and haircut. And always, the figure was there. Closer each time. I backed up until I hit the wall. My pulse was a roar in my ears. The copier rattled, then jammed with a violent crunch. Silence. Then, the whispering started again. This time, it wasn't faint. It was right next to my ear. Words I couldn't understand, spoken in a voice that didn't sound human. I bolted, left the papers, the reports, everything. I slammed the door and didn't stop running until I was in the elevator, punching the button like my life depended on it. As the door slid shut, I heard something on the other side. A scrape, like fingernails dragging along the metal. That night, I swore I'd never go back in there again. But the office had other plans. Because the next morning, when I came in early, there was a stack of papers already waiting on my desk. Cleanly printed, stapled, perfectly aligned. On the top page, in black block letters, was a note. You look better when you don't turn around. The morning after the copier incident, I sat at my desk with the neat stack of papers staring back at me. Every time I reached to move them, I pulled my hand back like the pages were hot. They weren't reports. They weren't anything the office would ever produce. They were photographs, images of me I never consented to, never knew existed, showing angles no camera in the building should have been able to capture. I wanted to throw them away, but the thought of touching them again made my skin crawl. I told myself I'd shred them later. Instead, I shoved the pile into my bottom drawer and slammed it shut. For the rest of the morning, I couldn't focus. The buzz of the office felt sharper, like the whole floor knew what I had seen. People joked about the copy room, avoided the topic, but no one looked me directly in the eye. It was as though I'd been marked. At noon, Maria from HR stopped by my desk. She leaned down, voice low. "You saw it, didn't you?" I froze. "Saw what?" She didn't answer. She just placed a sticky note on my desk and walked away without another word. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. It said, "It's closer when you ignore it." The rest of the day passed in a blur, but that night, my manager sent an email asking me to run final copies of the weekly reports. Of course, they needed to be done before morning. Of course, the copy room was the only option. I thought about refusing, just typing back, "No, I can't." But what excuse could I give? "Sorry, the copy room is haunted." I'd be laughed out of the building and probably unemployed by morning. So, just after 10 p.m., I found myself back on the 14th floor. The office was dark except for the emergency lights in the halls. My footsteps echoed too loud as I made my way to the copy room. I paused outside the door, my hand hovering over the handle, every part of me screaming not to go in. I went in anyway. The machines were silent. The overhead fluorescents flickered once, then steadied, buzzing like trapped flies. I loaded the reports quickly, kept my eyes down. The machine began its cycle with a clunk, spitting out pages in neat stacks. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not behind me. Not outside in the hall. Inside the room. I whipped around. The room was empty. Only the low hum of the copier filled the space. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might break my ribs. The footsteps started again. Slow. Deliberate. This time I realized the sound wasn't from the floor. It was above me. I tilted my head back. The ceiling tiles were trembling. Dust sifted down in tiny specks. Something was moving in the crawl space above. Something heavy. I staggered back, my chair scraping the linoleum. That's when the copier jammed again. Pages spilled onto the floor, and mixed in were photographs, new ones. I crouched, hands shaking, and picked one up. It was the copy room. Tonight. The timestamp in the corner proved it. The image showed me standing exactly where I was, staring at the ceiling. And above me, through the ceiling tiles, a face was pressed down against the panels. The features were distorted by the flimsy tile, but I could see the pale outline of skin, a crooked mouth, eyes too dark and too wide. Watching, the footsteps above me stopped. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I lowered the photograph. And in that moment of silence, the lights went out. The room plunged into darkness. Only the faint glow of the copier screen illuminated the space, casting a sickly green light. Something moved in the corner. I didn't look. I couldn't. My body refused to turn my head. But I felt it. The weight of eyes. The scrape of something against the wall. Like fingernails tracing plaster. The air was cold now. Sharp, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in seconds. And then, right behind my ear, came the whisper. "You shouldn't look at me." I bolted for the door. My hands fumbled on the handle, slick with sweat, but I wrenched it open and ran. Down the hall, into the elevator, down to the lobby. I didn't stop until I was outside, the night air hitting me like a slap. I went home shaking, vowing I'd never step foot in that room again. But the office doesn't let go that easily. Because the next morning, sitting neatly in the middle of my desk, was a single page of fresh copy. It was a picture of me running from the copy room. And behind me, in the photo, the door was still open. Something tall and thin was stepping out. I didn't tell anyone. I wanted to. I drafted an email to my manager, typed out a message to Maria, even hovered over the option to call building security. But every time I tried, I froze. I couldn't explain it without sounding insane. Worse, I had no proof. I had thrown away the photographs, or so I thought. On Wednesday morning, my bottom drawer was full of them again. Hundreds of copies, neatly stacked, the same grainy black and white images of me in the copy room. In some, I was alone. In others, the tall figure stood closer and closer, its blurred hands hovering just above my skin. The timestamps stretched back months, maybe years. It wasn't just watching me. It had been watching everyone who'd ever stepped into that room. I slammed the drawer shut, fighting nausea. That was when Thomas from accounting walked by. He glanced at me, paused, and asked, "Rough night?" I tried to smile, but he didn't move on. His eyes flicked to my drawer, then back to me. His face had that pale, knowing look, the kind you only see on someone who's seen the same nightmare you have. He leaned close and whispered, "Don't let it know you're afraid. It prints more when you're afraid." Before I could respond, he straightened, gave me a stiff nod, and left. The words haunted me all day. It prints more when you're afraid. Like the machine was feeding on me. That night, I stayed late again, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Deadlines stacked up, and like clockwork, my manager messaged me, "Run off copies before morning." My stomach twisted as I walked to the copy room. The hall felt longer than usual, every step echoing. When I opened the door, the room was already running. The copier was on. Paper spilled from the tray in steady rhythm, slapping onto the floor in a growing pile. No one else was there. At least, no one I could see. The overhead lights flickered. The machine groaned. I forced myself to step inside. Every sheet on the floor was a photograph. All of them showed the copy room. But in these images, the angle had changed. They weren't shots of me anymore. They were shots of the door. The photographs showed the door opening, frame by frame, wider each time, until in the last image, the hallway outside was visible. My hallway. Tonight, I dropped the stack I'd been carrying. The copier rattled, hissed, then jammed. The air thickened, cold and electric. I turned toward the door to leave and froze. It was open, just a crack, maybe an inch, but I had closed it behind me. I knew I had. My heart hammered in my chest. I backed toward the copier, eyes locked on that thin sliver of hallway, waiting for something, anything, to move. Then the door slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. I screamed. The copier exploded to life, spewing page after page in a deafening roar. Paper whipped across the room like a storm. My hair stuck to my face, the air stung, and through the chaos, I heard it. Breathing. Heavy. Wet. Right behind me. I spun. The copier lid was rising, slowly, as though something was pushing up from underneath. The glass flexed, cracked. A hand, long, pale fingers pressed flat, emerged against the inside. Another joined it, both palms pushing upward, trying to break through. The whisper came again, louder this time, hissing through the room. "You don't belong here." I stumbled back, hitting the wall. The lights overhead flickered wildly, buzzing like they might burst. The copier gave one last mechanical shriek, then stopped dead. The room went silent. Every scattered paper drifted to the floor, settling in uneven piles. My breath came in ragged gasps. And then I saw the final page slide from the tray. Just one sheet. Crisp. Fresh. It was a photo of me. Not in the copy room. Not in the office. In my bedroom. Asleep. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat on the edge of my bed with every light in the apartment blazing, staring at the single photograph that had come out of the copier. It wasn't just my room, it was my room last night. Same sheets, same clothes tossed on the chair. In the picture, I was lying on my side, face turned slightly toward the camera, mouth slack in sleep. And just at the edge of the photo, where the darkness of my closet began, something pale was crouched low, too blurred to make out clearly. I tore the photo in half, then again, until it was confetti in my trash bin. But when I went to the bathroom and came back, the scraps were gone. The trash bin was empty. That's when I stopped pretending this was stress or exhaustion. Something was using the copier as a doorway, and now it had followed me home. The next morning, I told my manager I was sick. I couldn't go in. I spent the day pacing my apartment, blinds drawn, trying not to look at the closet. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the pipes made my skin crawl. By evening, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe I'd finally cracked under the weight of long hours. But then, at 7:13 p.m., my phone buzzed with a new email. No sender, no subject line, just an attachment, a PDF. I opened it against every instinct. The file was a scan of a photocopy, grainy, black and white. It was me, standing at my kitchen counter, staring at my laptop. Right now, I slammed the lid shut. My hands shook. I unplugged everything in the apartment, killed the Wi-Fi, even yanked my phone charger from the wall. I sat in silence, breathing hard. And still, somewhere in the apartment, I heard the steady whir of a machine. A mechanical hum I recognized instantly. The sound of a copier warming up. I followed it, against all logic, because ignoring it was worse. It came from my bedroom, from my closet. When I slid the door open, there it was. The office copier, jammed between my coats and boxes, too big to fit, and yet somehow crammed there anyway. Its display flickered, green light casting sick shadows on the walls. The tray slid open. A page spilled out. Another. I wanted to run, but my legs locked. All I could do was stand there as the papers scattered at my feet, each one showing the same thing. Me, standing in the closet doorway, staring at the copier. Only in the photos, I wasn't alone. The figure was behind me, always closer. Closer. I squeezed my eyes shut, forced my body to move, grabbed the nearest heavy thing I could find, an old lamp, and swung it down onto the copier. The glass cracked. The light sputtered. Pages tore mid-cycle. The machine shrieked like metal tearing. Smoke poured from the vents, thick and acrid. I hit it again, and again, until the lid split off, until sparks hissed, and the whole thing went still. Silence. I collapsed, coughing, heart slamming in my chest. The copier was a ruin, a dead hulk of plastic and wires. And then, from the scattered pile of ruined papers, I saw one last photograph slide free. It was blank, white. Then, slowly, words began to appear across the surface, darkening like ink soaking through. You can break the machine. You can't break me. I burned every page. I dragged the copier's remains to the dumpster in the alley, piece by piece, until nothing was left but shattered plastic and broken glass. My neighbors must have thought I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. The next morning, I called in my resignation. I told myself I'd never set foot in that office again. But sometimes at night, when the apartment is quiet, I hear it. The faint whir, the sound of paper sliding free. And in the morning, there's always one fresh sheet waiting on my desk. Always blank, until I look away. Story 3. The overnight shift at Redwood Factory. The Redwood manufacturing plant had been around since the 1950s, a sprawling skeleton of brick and steel that had outlived every smaller business in town. By the time I started working there, the machines were older than most of the workers, and the whole place smelled like oil and rust. I wasn't supposed to be on nights. My contract was for day shifts only, but when the union went on strike for a week, management started plugging gaps however they could. That meant me, 23 years old and barely 6 months into the job, being handed the graveyard slot. Midnight to 6 a.m. I didn't fight it. Money was money, and I needed every dollar. The factory was a different beast at night. During the day, the roar of conveyor belts and the slam of presses filled every corner. At night, when the lines were shut down, the place echoed. You could hear the building breathing, the groans of steel expanding, the drip of condensation hitting the floor, the hum of lights overhead. There were only 3 of us scheduled that week. Me, a guy named Richard who mostly kept to himself, and an older supervisor named Carl. Carl had been there since the 70s, a lifer with a permanent cigarette between his fingers and a voice like gravel. He gave me a quick orientation, told me to stick to my station, and reminded me not to wander. Some parts of this place are off limits at night, he said. Insurance reasons. I nodded, though the warning didn't sit right. Insurance? That sounded like a lazy excuse. The first night was uneventful. I inspected machinery, logged routine checks, and tried to keep my eyes open. The second night, things changed. Around 2 a.m., I was making rounds near the assembly line when I heard a sound that didn't belong. It was faint, almost lost in the hum of the lights, but distinct, the slow, rhythmic click of footsteps on concrete. I froze, listening. Carl and Richard were both on the opposite end of the building. No one else was supposed to be here. Hello, I called. My voice bounced through the cavernous space, unanswered. The clicking stopped. I waited a few more seconds, then shook it off and finished my round. But the sound followed me all night, sometimes distant, sometimes closer, always just behind me. By the time my shift ended, I was convinced it was in my head. Sleep deprivation. Nothing more. Night 3 proved me wrong. I was halfway through logging inspection notes when the PA system crackled to life. The loudspeakers hadn't been used in years, but suddenly a burst of static filled the building. Then came a voice. Faint. Distorted. Still here. I jumped, dropping my clipboard. The static cut out. I found Carl smoking near the loading dock and asked if he'd heard it. He just gave me a flat look. Don't pay attention to that, he muttered. Old wires. They bleed sometimes. Bleed. That was the word he used. When I pressed him, he changed the subject. That night, as I made another round past the older presses, I noticed something strange. One of the machines, shut down for decades, covered in dust and tagged with red tape, was running. Its gears turned slowly, grinding metal against metal, though no power ran to the circuit. I stepped closer, my flashlight beam trembling. The safety guard was gone, exposing the press's jaws as they rose and fell in eerie silence. And there, lodged between the teeth, was a scrap of fabric. I reached out with my pen and pulled it free. Dark blue, stiff with something that wasn't oil. I dropped it immediately. By the time I turned back, the machine was silent again, as if it had never moved. I told Carl what I saw. He didn't look surprised. Don't go near the old line again, he said, his tone sharp now. You hear me? I should have pushed. I should have demanded an explanation. But the way he looked at me, eyes heavy and tired, made my words die in my throat. The fourth night was worse. Richard didn't show up, leaving me alone with Carl. I didn't see him much, though. He stayed holed up in the supervisor's office, lights off, door closed. Around 3 a.m., I heard the footsteps again. This time, they weren't faint. They were right behind me, heel to toe, slow and deliberate. I turned fast, flashlight cutting through the dark. No one. But when I lowered the beam, I saw it. Wet footprints on the concrete, trailing in a line toward me. Bare feet. I backed away slowly, every instinct screaming to run. The prints stopped a few feet ahead of me, glistening faintly in the overhead light. And then, like water evaporating, they vanished. That was the moment I decided I couldn't do this anymore. I would finish the week, collect my pay, and quit. But the factory had other plans. At 5:40 a.m., 20 minutes before the end of my shift, the fire alarm blared. Red lights spun, sirens howled. I grabbed my helmet and ran for the exit, heart racing. The building was empty. No smoke, no fire, nothing. But as I ran past the old presses, I saw something I can't forget. All of them, every machine that had been silent for decades, were running. Conveyors moving, presses slamming, rollers spinning, and between them, figures moved. Not workers. Shadows shaped like people, flickering in and out of sight. Some carried tools, some push carts. All of them moved with jerky, unnatural precision, like film on a broken reel. I ran faster. When I burst into the morning air, Carl was already outside, leaning against the wall, smoking. He didn't look alarmed at all. "You saw them, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I couldn't speak. He sighed, exhaling smoke. "Don't worry. They don't leave the floor." And then he walked away, leaving me with the sound of machinery still echoing in my ears. I didn't quit the next day, though I should have. Something about the way Carl had said it, "They don't leave the floor," sat heavy in my mind. Like he wasn't warning me out of concern, but simply stating a fact of nature. Rain falls, metal rusts, ghosts stay where they died. When I got home that morning, I didn't sleep. I pulled out my laptop and started searching. Redwood Manufacturing had no official history online, but buried in archived newspapers I found something. A fire. August 1978. The article was short and vague. Minor industrial accident at Redwood plant results in several injuries. One fatality confirmed. But then I found another piece, printed a week later. It named the worker who died, a man named Henry Lask, age 36, crushed under one of the older presses. The same model I'd seen running on its own. I went further back, combing obituaries, union newsletters, anything I could find. Redwood had a trail of incidents going back decades, electrocutions, falls, amputations. All quieted down, brushed under the rug. The factory had always eaten people. By the time I showed up for my next shift, I was a wreck. My eyes burned, my hands shook. Richard was back that night, though he didn't look much better. He muttered something about his car breaking down, but I caught the way he avoided Carl's eyes. Like he'd wanted out too. The shift dragged. Hours felt like days. Every shadow looked alive. At one point, I passed the break room and stopped cold. The vending machine was humming. Nothing strange about that, except the machine had been unplugged for years, its glass door covered in dust. But inside, every single slot was full. Not with snacks, but with things that had no business being there. A glove with 2 fingers missing. A dented hard hat, stained dark. A pair of safety goggles cracked down the middle. And on the bottom row, a folded uniform. Redwood blue. I reached for the door before I realized it wasn't dust-covered anymore. It was spotless, like it had been wiped clean just for me. I walked away fast. At 3:17 a.m., I remember the exact time because my watch froze then. The PA system came on again. All workers report to line 4. Static swallowed the rest. I glanced at Richard across the floor. He'd heard it too. His face had gone pale. "We don't have a line 4 anymore," he whispered. But the lights above one of the dead lines flickered on, glowing pale yellow. And the machines started moving. I don't know why we didn't run. Maybe fear rooted us, or maybe something in that voice demanded obedience. But Richard and I walked, side by side, toward the reawakened line. The machines roared, though the power grid was silent. Shadows swarmed the conveyor, passing phantom tools, welding invisible seams. I could hear them murmuring, a low chant like factory banter blurred into one droning note. Then Richard grabbed my arm. "Look," he hissed. On the conveyor, among phantom parts, something solid moved. A human arm. Flesh, pale and mottled, severed at the shoulder. It rode the belt as though waiting for assembly. Another piece followed. A leg, then a torso, each one sliding closer to the press at the end of the line. The shadows leaned in, working fast, stitching, welding, building. They weren't making parts. They were rebuilding him. I saw the face last. A man's head, eyes closed, mouth slack. I recognized it instantly from the grainy obituary photo I'd found online. Henry Lask. Richard staggered back, whispering, "No, no, no." But the conveyor carried Henry's reassembled body forward. At the press, the jaws descended with a sickening slam. When they lifted, Henry opened his eyes and smiled. The PA system crackled again. "New shift begins now." Henry stood, joints creaking like old hinges. The shadows parted for him as though he was their foreman. He turned toward us, his half-crushed face lit by the flicker of dying bulbs. Richard bolted. He didn't get far. The machines screamed louder, their belts winding faster. Something unseen caught his legs, dragging him toward the line. He thrashed, clawing at the concrete, but it didn't matter. The conveyor swallowed him, shadows surging like vultures. I ran the other way, through the maze of machinery, past the break room, past the old locker banks where doors slammed on their own. Every step, I felt the air grow thicker, heavier, as though the factory itself was closing in. When I reached the loading dock, Carl was there again, smoking in the same spot. I screamed at him to help, begged him to call someone, do something. He just shook his head slowly. "This place doesn't let go," he said. "You don't quit Redwood. You just change shifts." Behind me, the line roared like a feeding beast. I didn't look back. I ran into the night, lungs burning, not stopping until the factory was a silhouette on the horizon. I didn't go home. I didn't go back. I left town with nothing but the clothes on my back and the weight of what I'd seen. But some nights, always around 3 a.m., I hear the hum of machines in my dreams. And sometimes, I wake to the faint sound of the PA system in my apartment, whispering through static. "All workers report to line 4. I thought leaving town would save me. For a while, it almost felt like it had. I moved 3 states over, found a job washing dishes in a diner, told myself the past was just that, past. I didn't talk about Redwood, didn't let myself think about it longer than a passing nightmare. But nightmares don't care where you live. The first sign came 6 months later. I was closing up the diner late one night, sweeping the floor, when the lights flickered. For less than a second, the ceiling above me wasn't smooth white plaster. It was corrugated steel, grimy and rust-streaked. The factory roof. I dropped the broom, heart slamming, but when the lights steadied, it was just the diner again. Then came the second sign. I was walking home, cutting through an empty lot. My phone buzzed with a voicemail alert. No missed call, just a message. When I pressed play, the hiss of static filled my ear. Then the voice. "All workers report to line 4. I deleted it, hurled the phone into the weeds, and kept walking. But Redwood had already marked me. It started small, the smell of burning oil in my apartment, the taste of rust in my water. Then worse. Some nights, when I looked out my window, the skyline shimmered. And there it was, the silhouette of the factory, smoke pouring from its stack, impossibly close. The first time I saw it, I convinced myself it was a hallucination. By the 4th, I stopped questioning it. I knew Redwood wasn't just a place. It was a machine. And once you'd fed it, it wanted you forever. The final straw came one night when I was dead asleep and my apartment filled with a low, endless hum. Not my fridge, not traffic. A hum so deep it vibrated my ribs. The hum of the presses. I sat up. My room was dark except for a faint yellow glow coming from under the door. The light of line 4. I don't know what possessed me, but I stood and opened the door. My apartment hallway was gone. In its place stretched the factory floor, stretching on forever, lit by flickering lamps. Conveyor belts churned. Machines groaned. And in the distance, hundreds of shadows moved in rhythm, chanting low, their voices blending into one mechanical drone. I should have run. I should have closed the door and locked it. But something pulled me forward. That's when I saw Richard. or what was left of him. He was working the line, his body stitched together like the parts I'd seen on the conveyor, face crushed flat on one side. His hands were blistered black, but they moved fast, too fast, welding invisible pieces, fitting phantom parts. He didn't look up. I screamed his name. He didn't respond. None of them did. The workers, every lost soul Redwood had swallowed, kept building, sweat rolling, shadows moving them like marionettes. And then I saw Henry Lask. He wasn't on the line anymore. He stood at the end, clipboard in hand, face half-caved from the press. His eyes burned in the yellow light. He turned slowly, like he'd been waiting for me, and smiled. "New shift," he rasped. His voice wasn't his own anymore. It was the PA system itself, deep and mechanical. "Report to your station." I backed away, heart hammering. But when I turned, the exit wasn't there. Just another row of machines. Another endless line. "Report to your station." The voice repeated, now from everywhere at once. The shadows surged. Cold hands closed around my wrists, dragging me forward. I kicked, screamed, fought. It didn't matter. They shoved me toward the conveyor, where empty space waited between two half-built shells. My station. No, I roared, thrashing, but the shadows pinned me. A welding torch appeared in my hand, glowing white-hot. My body moved on its own, jerking, working, building, and I realized the truth. You don't quit Redwood. You just change shifts. That was 3 years ago, or 3 hours. Time doesn't work the same here. All I know is, if you're hearing this, don't ever take an overnight job at Redwood. Because once you punch in, you never clock out. Story 4. The security guards last night. My name's Daniel, and I've worked security for 20 years. Most of the time, it's boring. Walking empty halls, checking locks, writing reports no one reads. But sometimes the quiet jobs are the worst. Last year I got hired for a temporary gig covering night shifts at an office complex on the edge of town. The place had been half abandoned after its parent company went under, but one wing still ran skeleton crews during the day. At night, it was just me and 1,000 empty cubicles. I didn't mind at first. The pay was decent, and after years of standing post in shopping malls and hospitals, having the whole place to myself was a relief. But by the second week, I started noticing things that didn't make sense. It started small. On my first round one night, I passed a row of cubicles and froze. One of the desk lamps was on. The weird part wasn't the light. It was the fact that the cubicle had been cleared out weeks ago. No chair, no computer, no desk. Just bare carpet and white walls. Yet there was a lamp burning bright on the floor, plugged into nothing. I shut it off. 10 minutes later, when I came back, it was on again. Then came the voices. Around 2 a.m., when the silence stretched tight, I'd hear low murmurs drifting from the upper floors. Too soft to make out words, but enough to tell there were multiple people talking. Whenever I went up, the voices stopped. One night, I thought I'd catch them, so I crept upstairs with my flashlight off. But the second I stepped onto the landing, the entire floor was dead quiet. My skin prickled. I knew I hadn't imagined it. And then there were the cameras. The security office had 12 monitors hooked up to the building's CCTV system. Most showed nothing but static, but the ones that worked flickered between hallways and lobbies. More than once I saw movement on them. A shadow passing just out of view, a figure ducking behind a corner. I'd rush to that spot, and it would be empty. But the feed didn't lie. One night, while sipping burnt coffee, I saw a man on the monitor. He was walking down the west corridor, hands in his pockets, head low. At first I thought maybe someone had broken in. I grabbed my flashlight and ran straight there. The hall was empty. I jogged back to the office, half convinced I'd find the monitor blank. But the man was still there. Still walking, same hall, same pace. like he hadn't noticed me at all. I stared at the screen, and that's when I realized something was off. The man's feet never touched the floor. He glided a few inches above it, like he was being carried. I yanked the plug from the wall, and the monitors went black. For the rest of the shift, I sat in the dark, staring at the door, waiting for something to move. The worst part came the following week. I was doing rounds on the top floor, the one with the abandoned executive offices, when I heard footsteps behind me, not echoing down the hall, not faint or far, directly behind me. I turned so fast I almost fell. The hallway stretched empty in both directions. But the sound didn't stop. It circled me. Slow, deliberate, heel to toe. I couldn't see a thing, but I swear I could feel breath on my neck. I bolted for the stairwell and didn't stop running until I was back at the security office, chest heaving. That was when I decided to start documenting everything. Each night, after my shift, I wrote down what I'd seen, what I'd heard, anything out of place. A pattern started to form. The activity peaked between 1:45 and 3:15 a.m. The voices always came from the top floor, and the man on the monitor only ever appeared when I was alone in the office. It was almost like something new I was watching. One night, I came in early and found Carl, an older guard who covered days, packing his things. He was supposed to train me, but we barely crossed paths. "You're leaving already?" I asked. He gave me a look that made my stomach knot. "Kid, some jobs aren't worth the paycheck," he muttered. Then he paused, like he wanted to say more, but shook his head. "Just don't follow the voices." That night, of course, I followed the voices. They were louder than ever, echoing down from the executive wing. Dozens of them, rising and falling like a crowd in the middle of an argument. I climbed the stairs, flashlight trembling in my hand. When I stepped onto the top floor, the sound cut off. Silence. Then, from the far end of the hall, a door creaked open. The corner office. The biggest one. My beam caught a figure inside. A man in a suit, standing by the window, head turned toward me. His face was featureless, blurred like someone had smeared his skin with wet paint. I froze. And then, from every office around me, doors began to open. Hinges squealing. More figures stepped out, all in business suits, all faceless. They walked slowly, in perfect unison, toward the hall where I stood. I ran. I don't remember how I made it down the stairs, only the feeling of air rushing past me, the slam of my boots on concrete. When I burst into the security office, the monitors were already on, even though I hadn't plugged them back in. Every screen showed the same feed. Me, sprinting down the hallway. And behind me, closer in each frame, the faceless men. I couldn't go back after that. I sat in the office, every light on, clutching my flashlight like a weapon, eyes glued to the door. The monitors kept cycling through the same frozen image of me running, the faceless men closing in frame by frame. I wanted to smash them, but some part of me was terrified the moment the glass broke, whatever was on the other side would pour through. At 3:12 a.m., every monitor blinked. The frozen image vanished. Now they all showed live feeds of the building again. Only this time, every camera pointed at the same place, the security office. The screens showed me sitting there, hunched forward, looking pale and small under the fluorescent light. From different angles, 12 pairs of me. And in each one, the door behind me was open. I turned so fast my neck cracked. The door was still shut, locked, just as I'd left it. When I looked back at the screens, the 12 Daniels were gone. The office was empty. That was worse than seeing myself. I didn't last the rest of the shift. I called it early, told myself I'd never come back, and walked out at 4 a.m. But the building didn't let go that easy. When I came back the next night to hand in my badge, the manager insisted I cover just one more shift because they hadn't lined up a replacement. I almost refused. But then he mentioned a cash bonus. Enough to cover rent I was already late on. Greed is a dangerous thing. I said yes. The second I stepped through the doors, I knew I'd made a mistake. The place felt heavier, like the walls themselves were leaning closer. The air was colder, the silence deeper. On my first round, I found something waiting for me. In the break room, sitting on the table, was a spiral-bound notebook. My notebook, the one I kept at home, where I'd been writing down all the strange things I'd seen. But this one wasn't blank. Page after page was filled with words I hadn't written. Neat, blocky handwriting that wasn't mine. We see you. We hear you. Don't leave us. The last page stopped me cold. Report to the top floor. It's time. I slammed the notebook shut and bolted. But every hallway I turned down led me closer to the stairs. No matter which way I ran, I always ended up facing the same sign. Stairwell, level 4. It was like the building itself was funneling me up. I fought it for as long as I could, but eventually, I gave in. I climbed the stairs, every step echoing like a gunshot. When I reached the top, the doors opened on their own. The hall was alive with whispers, dozens of them, overlapping, pouring from every office. And at the far end, the corner office glowed. The same blurred man stood by the window. This time, I didn't freeze. I raised my flashlight and marched forward. As I passed each doorway, the voices grew louder. The faceless men stood inside the offices, shoulder to shoulder, watching me pass. None moved. None blinked. Just turned their blank heads to follow. By the time I reached the corner office, I was shaking so hard I could barely breathe. The man by the window turned to face me. His head tilted. The blur rippled across where his features should have been, like static on a broken TV. And then, in a voice that wasn't a voice but a chorus of all the whispers together, he spoke. You've been watching us. Now it's our turn. The blinds snapped shut behind him. The office plunged into darkness. Every flashlight I'd ever trusted, every bit of training I'd relied on, it all meant nothing. My beam cut through nothing but black. Then, right next to my ear, a whisper. Sit down. My knees buckled. I dropped into the nearest chair, breath ragged. Across the office, the figure moved closer, one step at a time. With each step, his blur sharpened. A chin, a mouth, a nose. Until finally, when he stood over me, his face was my own. Every detail, every line. It smiled. And then all the doors in the hallway slammed shut at once. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at myself. The smile on its face didn't move, but I could feel it pressing into me, like heat radiating from a furnace. I tried to speak, to demand answers, but no sound came out. My throat locked, my chest squeezed tight. The other me leaned forward, close enough that I should have felt breath. But there was nothing, just a hollow, freezing absence. You belong to the building now, it whispered, though its lips barely moved. We've been waiting for you. Behind it, the blinds rattled. The window glass flexed inward, bending like it was made of water. Shapes pressed against it from the outside. Faces, hands, bodies stacked on top of each other, trying to push through. The office filled with the sound of them groaning. Not loud, not screams, but low and endless, like a graveyard exhaling. I shot to my feet. My chair toppled over, crashing onto the carpet. I stumbled toward the door, heart hammering so hard it felt like it might explode. The hall was worse than before. Every office door was shut now, but behind each one came pounding. Fists slamming, nails dragging down walls. The fluorescent lights flickered once, twice, then blew out completely. The only glow left was from the exit sign at the far end. I ran for it. My boots hit the carpet so hard I barely felt the ground. The pounding in the offices rose, syncing with my steps. Faster, louder, as though the whole building wanted to burst open. The stairwell door was locked. I slammed my shoulder against it again and again, screaming, begging, until finally the lock gave and the door cracked open. The stairwell was pitch black, colder than anything I'd ever felt. My flashlight wouldn't turn on, no matter how hard I hit it. But I had no choice. I plunged down the steps 2 at a time, my hand grazing the wall to keep balance. My breath came in ragged bursts. Halfway down, the sound started. A second set of footsteps. Not above me, not below me, right behind. I didn't look. I couldn't. I just ran faster until I reached the lobby and burst out into the open air. Only, it wasn't the parking lot. It was the same lobby, same marble floor, same security desk. I had looped. Somewhere above me, the whispers started laughing. I turned, slammed back into the stairwell, ran again. Same result. Every path led back to the lobby. The building wasn't letting me leave. I collapsed against the desk, sobbing, my body trembling so hard I thought my bones might snap. And then I heard the intercom crackle. "Daniel, to the lobby," the voice said. My voice. "Daniel, it's time for your shift to end." The doors at the front of the building unlocked with a soft click. I stood, shaking, half dead from fear, but still standing. If it was a trick, I didn't care. I had to take it. I pushed through the glass doors into the parking lot. Cold night air hit my lungs like a lifeline. I ran to my car, didn't look back, didn't breathe until I was on the highway. I never returned. But sometimes, at night, when I close my eyes, I see that office again. I see myself standing by the window, smiling. And I know one day the building will call me back. Because I never really quit. I didn't sleep that night. Not a second. I sat on my couch, staring at my front door as if something might walk in. Every time I blinked, I saw that other me smiling through the window. When the morning light finally spilled across the carpet, it didn't make me feel safer. If anything, it was worse, because I realized I wasn't imagining it. The terror hadn't faded with the sunrise. It had followed me home. For the next week, I refused to answer calls from the company. They left voicemails, polite at first, then sharper. They needed me back for shifts. They didn't want to hire someone else. But I knew what that meant. I was supposed to go back. Not because they wanted me, but because the building wanted me. I never called back. Instead, I started looking for new work. Supermarkets, warehouses, even fast food, anywhere but security. But no one would call me back. Every application seemed to vanish into a void. Then the letters began. Not emails. Actual letters. Slipped under my apartment door while I slept. No envelope, just folded paper. Always written in my own handwriting. The first one said, "You forgot to clock out." The second, "Your replacement is waiting." The third, "We'll see you Friday." I moved apartments. Different city, different job. Didn't tell anyone where I went. For a while, I almost believed I'd escaped. Then one night, after another double shift at my new job, I walked into my bathroom and froze. The mirror above the sink was fogged over. Not from steam, there hadn't been hot water running. Just fogged, as though someone had been breathing on it. And on the glass, a message traced with a fingertip. "Welcome back." That was last year. Since then, I've stopped fighting it. Every few months, I feel the pull. It starts with the dreams. I'm back in the building, sitting at the desk, listening to the static on the monitors. Then the letters arrive again, no matter where I live. And eventually, I wake up in my car, parked in that same empty lot, with the building's dark windows waiting for me. I don't remember driving there. I don't remember unlocking the door. But I'm always inside again, working a shift that never ends. You might be thinking I'm insane or making this up. Maybe I'd think the same if I were you. But last week, I tried something different. I took my phone with me. I set it to record while I walked the halls. When I checked it later, the footage was nothing but static. Except for one frame. One single frame, buried in the noise. It showed me, sitting at the desk, smiling, and behind me, row after row of other guards, all wearing my face. Every one of them grinning the same way. I think that's what the building does. It doesn't just want you there. It keeps you, makes copies, puts you on the other side of the glass. So if you ever find yourself alone in a late-night office or working security in an empty building, don't trust the mirrors. Don't look too long at the monitors. And if you hear someone calling your name over the intercom, don't answer, because it might not be you they're calling. It might be the version of you that never left. And once you answer, you'll never get out again.